아저씨 얼굴 봤어?
Did you get a chance to see his face?
I did.
어떻게 생겼어?
Do you remember what he looked like?
Normal.
Yeah.
Normal.
그냥 평범해요.
It's not a rare thing for two films to be compared within the same genre, especially if those films are two of the standouts in that category. The mystery genre certainly had its heyday during the era of film noir, but never really returned as the mainstream juggernaut it once was. Mystery as a whole seems to now mostly be confined to tales associated with murder, with just a few directors breaking that trend. But there's always been enough interest in the genre to keep it alive. However, it was in the 2000s that two murder mystery films were released that became inseparable comparisons to one another by critics, audience members, and even their respective directors. These films were Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder and David Fincher's Zodiac. The similarities were obvious: a serial killer story based on true events, an investigation thwarted by dead ends, and a lack of complete closure by the end of both films. It never came as a surprise that both of these films were weighed up against one another, but to me it seemed as though it was just because they were both murder mysteries whose release dates were relatively close to one another. Not many people spoke about the form of these films to examine the likenesses and the deviations of one another. The biggest thing that gives these films their own distinguishable identities are the perspectives that their stories are told from, but more importantly, how audience perspectives are woven into the films.
Hey, how do we know that this lead is real?
It's very real. You know how I know? Because I saw it on TV.
We'll begin by looking at how time is utilised. The ticking clock is a typical narrative device used in many films, so that the goals set by the characters are given reason to be solved within a certain time frame, and Zodiac and Memories are no exceptions to this trope. In Memories, we know that the killer will strike again. Through the information gathered throughout the film, the time frame for our characters is set. When it next rains, someone will die. This may not be a finite point in time, but it is an inevitability. We know it's going to rain again, and so now we have suspense. Zodiac, on the other hand, utilises the ticking clock very differently. Unlike Memories, after the first 26 minutes of the film, the killings end.
3390 at Washington, at the corner of Church. One stunt, and we think he's robbing him.
Is the crime still in progress?
Yes, please hurry.
And there's really no particular threat that the Zodiac will kill again. Here, the progression of time is used to show that eventually, people are going to stop looking for the killer, leaving the crime unresolved. We see a difference of suspense and mystery. The focus of one is that there is still a threat that could strike at any point. The characters need to act quickly before he does. The other film's focus is the unanswered question: who was responsible for this? The characters need to find an answer before too much time passes.
Too much time has gone by, okay? Too much of the evidence is lost. People get old, Robert, they forget.
Although both films treat time differently, a commonality of both is the effect of time on their environments. And don't worry, I'm getting around to the perspectives. The effects of the passage of time are most evident in the worlds of both films, as we see gradual changes in them as time passes. Memories of Murder opens with warm imagery and a sense of humble simplicity. However, once the killings start, they bring with it a grey cloud that constantly looms over the town for the majority of the film. Time moves on, yet the cloud lingers and removes any tenderness the image possessed. Only at the very end of the film do we return to the same location, but the subtle difference between the past and the present shows that the damage has already been done. Time has destroyed the town, and things will not return to how they once were. Zodiac's passage of time is different and exemplified with one simple technique: a fade to black.
Hello out there. Remember us?
The fades are very distinct in the movie, as the rest of the editing has a uniformity to it that makes the fades stand out. When they appear, they create what can only be described as a disconnect between the audience and the movie, as if they don't belong there. But they're salient because at every instance of time passing, the world within Zodiac changes. The interior of the San Francisco Chronicle changes over time. We see a time-lapse of the construction of the Transamerica Pyramid. What this shows us is that by distancing us from the world through the editing, the characters within the world surely must do the same. This is best displayed 2/3 through the movie. 4 years pass through another fade to black. We stare at a blank screen for what seems to be an eternity. But the length of this moment is indicating how far behind us the previous world was, and once it reappears, it's completely different. This is not the same world as the one we've been watching. The world continues to grow and change, ultimately forgetting about Zodiac, but the main characters and the audience can't. And it's this intertwining of character and audience that perspective comes into play. Because of the lack of continuity editing between large passages of time, there doesn't feel as though there's any connection between what we're watching and what we've seen. The people that inhabit the world we watch have no relation in the world we've been watching. With one technique, the killer was rendered completely irrelevant to the world. It's moved on. And this perspective is completely unique to the audience, as in the universe of the characters, everything is connected. However, as voyeurs, the audience is given the advantage of an outsider looking in on these people that your protagonists don't possess. So even though both films seem to tell their story from the point of view of the main characters, they still utilise multiple perspectives and use techniques that include the audience perspective for something unique.
Fantastic.
The general public of both movies act parallel to their worlds, nothing more than reflections of their environments. The citizens of San Francisco, shown in Zodiac, perceive the killer as nothing more than a public interest story, and have their own agendas of pursuing it.
Killing is his compulsion. Even though he tries to ignore it, it drives him. It's in his blood.
Could be, or maybe he just likes the attention.
Everyone except our main protagonists.
How do you mean business?
The general public trivialises the killer and don't see him as much of a threat. But Memories is different. As we saw, the balance of the world is upset upon the arrival of the killer, and again being nothing more than products of the world they inhabit, they too become unhinged. The shift causes people to change mentally,
아니, 뭐 날다리 좀 친 게 뭐 죄입니까?
and even manifests itself into the characters changing physically.
다리를 잘라야 된다고요? 에? 설명 또 해줄까?
Both films have the characters of their world so deeply rooted within it that the aspect of time lets the audience see the overall perspective of the background characters. But let's address the key characters. How are their stories told? Zodiac takes a much more traditional approach, in that we completely identify with the detectives of the case. The narrative is told from their perspectives from start to finish. Now it may seem strange that I say that, as we see the murders, yet the detectives weren't present. However, when we see the killings, all they show us is the information that the detectives gain.
We wanted to make sure that Zodiac was as he was described, and so there are scenes where he's 5'11", 195, and scenes where he's 6'1", 215, and so in each of those places we have a different actor playing him. Sometimes he's wearing glasses, sometimes he's not.
Everything in Zodiac puts us directly in the shoes of the protagonists, intentionally misguiding us and only finding out information when they find it out. And if another character finds out something that will further the case, it doesn't matter. We won't know until our main characters know.
You sitting down? Yes. You're not gonna believe this.
Zodiac ensures the audience maintain their own perspective, yet tells its story only from the point of view of the main characters. But Memories creates a larger boundary between the audience and its narrative. By treating its viewers as voyeurs and not participants, we don't see things solely from the perspectives of the people investigating the crimes. Here, we see the murders take place, but the primary difference is that we gain information that no one but the killer could have known. This altering of frames of reference continues, as we see flashbacks from a victim of the killer, as well as the POV from the killer himself. Portions of the story are told from a multitude of different characters, but the film's overall perspective can be completely summed up in the final shot of the movie. Detective Park looks directly at the audience, breaking all notions that this story is his. The final shot shows that when we were looking at what we thought was our main character's perspective, the film switches, and now the character is looking at our perspective. He wants to know, what's our perception of this? The audience perspective in Memories is much more noticeable than in Zodiac, but both films require introspection from the audience. Imagine that the real killer was watching this film. Some of these scenes are only from his perspective, they're his memories. This story becomes much more interesting when it's watched with the thought that the film knows an audience is watching, and if the killer is part of that audience, a lot more of the movie makes sense. Because audience perception in both films is an essential ingredient to the narratives. There's neither a conclusion between them. There's an ending, but it's not necessarily the ending we want, and so both films deal with what we believe is the truth and what we want to believe is the truth.
I can't tell if I wanted it to be Alan so bad because I actually thought it was him, or I just want all this to be over.
We see many of the characters wanting the investigation to end, and so they make their own truths.
It was Rick Marshall.
No.
Just say it.
But fundamentally, what really matters is whether or not we believe the truth. The final shot of Memories stares at us, asking us about our beliefs, but a character staring directly into the lens is used in both films to get the audience thinking. How important is it that we know the truth?
I need to stand there. I need to look him in the eye, and I need to know that it's him.
And so both films ask us to do the same, to look into the eyes of people. Do our perceptions matter? Do we believe it's them, or do we just want to believe it's them because the thought of not knowing is too painful? Zodiac and Memories feature both the suspect staring into the lens, as well as the reaction shots of the detective staring into the lens. We see things from both people's perspectives, but there's ambiguity in both. So ultimately, the only perspective that matters is that of the audience. And the films acknowledge that they're telling their stories to someone, and all the information that's gathered throughout the films is used to create the audience's perspective. The one thing about cinema is that it chooses what we see. Much of this can be explained through the philosophy of perspectivism. Coined by Friedrich Nietzsche, is the notion that all ideas are taken from different perspectives, and that truth can only be found through the collection of all perspectives. That philosophy is the heart of these stories. We gain a multitude of views, from the average person, the killer, and the people looking for answers. And this serves the only perspective that matters: ours. In the worlds of these movies, there are instances where only one person's perspective is relevant. For instance, only Graysmith sees his obsession through his eyes in this scene, but by seeing his POV, we gain insight to someone else's perception. By gaining all of these different characters' perceptions, we have what's closest to the truth. It just comes down to whether or not we believe it. Perspective and perception in my eyes all comes down to things that are exclusive to one character. Well, even though in the world one character may have a moment that's unique to them, By having that information also serve to the audience, a deeper understanding of the situation is formed. Perspective is an overlooked idea when it comes to filmmaking, and in the mystery genre, audience perception is vital, especially in stories that deal with ambiguity. Perspectivism can best be seen in Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon. We watch a single story from the points of view of different people, and what it boils down to is that the audience perspective is created from knowing each of the individual perspectives. By the end, the only thing that truly matters is what we think. Zodiac and Memories take the audience into account, and by treating their perspectives as one that's relevant in this world, the storytelling and techniques can become immensely powerful. You can intertwine audience perspective with a character, revealing information to both and making the reaction of your character simultaneous with your audience.
Not many people have basements in California.
Or you can discover a fact about your main character that the audience didn't know.
그때 그거 정말 백검한테 미리 대선수시킨 거 아니었어? 진짜 아니라니까.
Story is all about perspective. So perhaps if your story needs focus, just imagine that you need to tell it to one person, an all-seeing eye that's part of the world. Both films do this, and even though we identify with the detectives, we simultaneously develop our own perception thanks to the filmmaking. And if you wanted to know, out of Memories of Murder and Zodiac, which story I think is better, well, that all depends. Whose story are you talking about?